We are in thinking, language, and intelligence. So we want to piece together a little bit of what we learned in previous categories of dealing with memory, sensation, and perception, and try to understand how we are able to think, right? Learn, communicate, right? Have language in all forms, and finally use it as some form of knowledge to create intelligence. Right, when we think of intelligence, what are some of the things that come to mind in terms of person being intelligent? What ways, what forms could we be intelligent? What forms of intelligence, guys? All right, so we think one area is problem solving, the ability to problem solve. Anything else? Yes?
What's the multiple intelligence theory you've heard about, right?
Yeah.
The categories are, there's like mathematics, problem solving, I don't remember where music falls into that, but I think that's like one of them. There's like kinesthetics, which is like knowledge of how to move your own body, so like athletes score really high in that. Spatial awareness is like its own intelligence. Social memorization, I think.
Part of it too. All right, so what Will's saying is that, hey, on one hand, we got problem solving. Right? On the other hand, when we think of intelligence, it's not very isolated, right? In some sense of just problem solving. It's maybe problem solving in different areas with different traits and skills. All right, one can have emotional intelligence, the ability to process others' emotion, right? One can have cultural intelligence, the ability to understand differences in the human species, right, in terms of actions, behaviors. Kinesthetics, we could talk about how you're able to move the body and use it in the most efficient way, in the most sort of extravagant way. All sorts of layers to intelligence. Right, you may say, well, there's an IQ test, right, which is sort of a general intelligence quotient, but that doesn't really tell a story because we're all different, come from different sort of walks of life. We all express differently, which means that even intelligence has language. Language is not just limited to verbal. Language is the expression of your body, right? Body expression, things of that nature. People say, hey, I can sense your energy is off. I'm like, well, what is that all about? Well, someone may have energetic intelligence, right? They can feel the energies of other people. Some may have musical intelligence. They're able to pick up on rhythms and tones and things of that nature. All right, so as we move through this chapter, let's try to think of intelligence as really multi-layered, right? Multi-layered in how it can be applied. But for the most part, we say, well, it does really matter, depends on your environment. So maybe an IQ test has some substantiality to it to some degree for one particular place, right? Or one particular time, which could mean your culture, your society, it may give a bit of information to it, all right? All right, so with thinking, right? We say with thinking is cognition. Right, mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. It's not good enough just to say, hey, you know what? I can acquire the knowledge. I go to Concordia University and I acquired the knowledge. I say, can you express it? Can you apply the knowledge? Right? It sort of, we're thinking of, hey, can you apply the knowledge that you learned? But for cognition, we're just saying mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. Right? How do you know? Can you remember it? Can you express it? Right? You say, I remember it, but I can't really express it. Right? I remember it, but I can't really say it. You know that one thing I was talking about? Right? You know the thing. And you're like, well, if you can't express it, if it's not available at that time, in the we say, well, there may be some issues with the thinking at the moment in time. So thinking is not perfect. By any means is your thinking perfect. You say, I have an answer. And I say, what's the answer based off? I don't know. Definition in the science book, still reading, right? Webster's dictionary. Right, but have you considered the other alternatives? How many alternatives is it to the answer to this question? For the most part, usually there's a ton of alternatives, which means we are using the best possible available information, usually readily available, right? You say things are available based on a ton of factors, right? Your mood, right? Your energy, whether you can remember it. Say, hey, I know it, I just can't remember it right now. Well, it's no good to anyone if you can't remember it. All right, so we say with thinking we have a concept. So think of concept car. Concept would be your best example of anything, right? So what is your best example of a description of, say a Jaguar, right? Give me a description of it. What's your best example of that concept? Give me the best example of the concept of what it's like to go eat at a specific restaurant, right? You have group association of thoughts that you put together and try to explain the best available representation of something, anything, what a chair is. What exactly is a chair? Right? Say a chair is something to sit on. Well, you can sit on top of a fence, lean back. So, so we kind of group these things in a way to where we finally come up with some best representation. So, well, maybe a chair involves a few legs, has a flat surface that one could sit on, maybe has a back to it, right? You say, well, you take away the back to it, now your best representation is a stool, right? A stool may not be a chair per se, right? Even though you can sit on it. All right, so we're drawing in information that have associations, but we're trying to come up with our best sort of representation of what something is. All right, so we say, hey, concepts are mental groupings of similar objects, events, ideas, or people. Right? And it helps simplify your thinking. It helps you to think simply in terms of description. Now, human beings prefer simplicity, and we prefer convenience, which usually means even if the information is wrong, it's not that big of a deal to us, right? We've already moved on to something else, right? So we're not gonna ponder on things unless it's like a life critical decision. But usually, so our thinking is sort of motivated by convenience, how quickly you respond. If I was asked a question in class, a few people may raise a hand and say, hey, I have the readily available information that I think is the best representation of what you're trying to ask here, right? But you could say, given more time, I come up with a better answer, Dr. Ross, right? But you asked me on the spot, right? You're expecting an answer in 5 seconds. So we say there's a little bit of time factor to it too. All right, and so we create that with our prototype, right? Just like we would a prototype of a car, we say, here is the best example of this concept, right? And we use a mental image or best example of a category. Pretty much anything you speak has a mental image. You say your mind's eye. Well, what is your mind's eye? You're seeing what you're describing in some way, right? You're speaking it, but you are seeing it in some way. It has a mental image. And think about growing up and we're showing flashcards of cats, right? Dogs, letters, colors, things of that nature. That thing still applies. And then we want to match new items to a prototype, devise a quick and easy method for sorting items into categories. We'll look at that next. All right, so we say, hey, what is our best representation? What's your prototype? What is your prototype of something? All right? What's your prototype of an Asian man? What is your prototype of a Caucasian man? All right? What is your mental image that comes to mind? And what is your prototype of maybe someone that is blended in between the two? So it gets interesting. We can't clearly define what that is, but you say, hey, if I saw it, I'd most likely gravitate towards a certain mental image than others, and that description would give me the definition of that. All right, so here we have face-generated sort of imaging, right? We have 90% Caucasian men, which others living within the study here would have identified this particular face as being Caucasian in some way, a descriptor, right? What would that be? Looking at these images, tell me what you see in terms of your mental image that would describe a Caucasian man or an Asian man. Because obviously it's based on sort of features of some sort. What is the differences between these faces? What's the differences? Yeah.
It's a little more oval shaped.
All right, so you're saying the Asian man here has a little bit more oval-shaped head, face, head, etc. Whereas the Caucasian man may be a little bit more linear, right? More longer. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
There's a straight spectrum from Caucasian man to Asian man and how dark the facial hair is.
All right.
Or the 5 o'clock shadow that seems to be pretty prevalent on the Caucasian man.
All right, so the Caucasian man has a 5 o'clock shadow that seems to always sort of be there unless, right? Whereas the Asian man, so maybe you deem that, hey, Caucasian man may be a little bit more hairier than Asian man, right? That could be your thought, right? Your immediate thoughts or something. Think of how quickly we're grasping this information. Now you're kind of looking at it detailed and you're thinking about it. But in the real world, this is happening at the speed of light. Right? There's an Asian guy, and there's a black guy, white woman, you know, Latino. Right? This information is based on your experience, obviously. You say, hey, I was taught, I was conditioned, right? That this would describe this particular ethnic group, right? And these are the features associated with that. And here we say, hey, here's the blended part, right? A little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, not as prominent, not as dominant. Head is a little bit rounder, right? Maybe eyes even a little bit more peakier in some sense, right? Lips. Here we would say this is ambiguous. Maybe we saw this person like, hey man, what are you? Right? We saw this person at a bar. Hey, what are you? Like, what do you mean? Oh, they can't tell you. Why are you Asian? Right? That would probably be a natural question for us to ask. We'd be a little bit curious. Right? We wouldn't be for certain about something. You might probably look a little this and that. All right, so you're correct. Problem solving is a big one, right? How do we go about solving problems? We're not the only intelligent species in the world, right? Insects solve tremendous problems. Navigation, right? Food, squirrels. What's so unique about squirrels and their sort of food gathering sort of behavior?
They show it, they say something like
They say something for later. You say, wow, the problem solving for here is like, hey, you know what, there may be a time, maybe the thinking of a squirrel, we're not 100% sure, but we can just observe the behavior, that if I save food, I'll have some later. Maybe because of the environment. You say it'll be cold and there won't be maybe nuts falling on the ground or people walking around that much, even like in an urban environment, right? Squirrels also fake hiding their food. So squirrels sometimes dig little holes when they think they're being watched and pretend that they put something in the hole. And then you come out to check the hole, there's nothing in there, right? Like, well, that's pretty impressive. They're kind of thought this through. to solve a problem of someone knowing where the storing location is, right? Another squirrel, another animal, or a human being for that matter. All right, so here we said we get 3 ways of solving the problem. The first one, say you wing it. You wing it, trial and error, right? So you don't have much experience with the subject matter, but you do have the confidence maybe that you think you could solve a problem, right? Let's say it's math, maybe you use some principles you learned before, but you say it doesn't really apply to this sort of formula or even this subject, right? Maybe this is algebra, we're talking trigonometry or something. Trial and error. So you try it out and you get different results, right? Usually you get a ton of error before you actually have some success. The issue with that is like, well, you know what? This is going to take a long time before you get it right, right? And we say, we don't have that much time. Right? The human mind, think even in this class, in any class, anywhere, paying attention is difficult, right? Naturally difficult. Naturally difficult. It's gotten worse over time because of, mobile technologies and laptops and stuff like that, right? Entertainment. But, say, we don't want to pay attention for that long, right? To anything. No one wants to expend that amount of attention, fix, sort of attention on it. So trial error is usually it's our last option, right? The most accurate would be algorithm. Algorithms say, hey, I know the steps to solve this problem, right? And I will do the steps so I can be accurate, right? Algorithms produce the best accuracy. Right? So I know the steps to solve this problem. If I want to do it accurately, I'll do it this way. Once again, say it may take a little bit more time, right? Right. On the flip side, you say, well, are there any shortcuts? Because if time is a thing for human beings, we like convenience even over being 100% accurate. You say we don't need to be 100% accurate. With constant growing probabilities, we say we need to be 80% accurate, right? 70% accurate. And we use what we call shortcuts, mental shortcuts, right? Think of going into a grocery store, right? Most grocery stores, I believe, have like maps, right? People don't know, right? But you have to go ask, hey, you got a map of the store? You say that takes time to go up into the customer service, ask for a map of some sort where everything is currently, right, in that store, and then you have to read the map, look for, well, this will produce good, accurate results. I know exactly where the ketchup is, right? Exactly where the hot sauce is, exactly where the mayonnaise is. We say, hey, that might take time, might be a line or something going to the customer service desk. And so what do? We usually walk in the store and we just start wandering around using shortcuts, right? We say, hey, I remember last time I went to a grocery store that hot sauce is in the ethnic food section, right? And you go there and look and it's not, it's in the sauces section, right? You go to the sauces section, maybe it's somewhere else, in the third. You're like, well, you have to go 2 to 3 places before you get accurate results, right? But we say we thought, we believed, that based on prior knowledge, that this was the quickest way, right? Constantly looking for quick. It's a tendency, I would say. Some people are not always looking for quick, right? You get people who are engineer-minded sort of individuals, right? All right, so what is insight, right? Insight is a sudden realization, right? Insight, you say, hey, comes from the subconscious, right? You say, I wasn't really thinking about it, but it popped into mind. Well, how did it pop into mind, right? You say subconscious, well, we already have associations. We have relativity there. We have references, frames of references about things, right? And you're asked a question like, boom, it comes in, right? Took a few seconds, it comes in, right? Suddenly, you come to the realization that you know something, which means it may have to do with some sort of energy within the neurons to spark like the associations you already have. All right, contrast but strategy-based solutions, right? We say, well, this is different than we said heuristics, right? Any other solutions of algorithms, trial and error, because those require a ton of effort, right? Thinking's not perfect. We think perfect. That's how biased we are. We think we give phenomenal answers. Usually, most people give the best answer that they have at that moment. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent, right? Does not mean you're not intelligent. You say, hey, Dr. Ross, you know what, I can't answer questions that think. I'm a person who needs a little bit of time to give an accurate answer. Fine. That means you have the knowledge, you've acquired it, you can apply it, maybe you just can't apply it that quickly. Right? You say, is that bad? It's neither. Right? Well, maybe depending on the context and what you needed. Right? The application of the knowledge. So what's more important, knowing or applying? Right? We say the application of knowledge is far superior than just knowing it. Say you know a ton of stuff, like I know a ton of stuff, but can you apply it in any way? So here's sort of the common school of thought in terms of education, right? You know, they say bachelor's degree is usually there to get the foot in the door, right? Get you a job, get you a career, make some money, get the foot in the door. Master's degree is usually gives you the ability to teach, right? And so when you get your doctorate or your PhD, they say it's there to teach yourself, right? You're like, well, what does that mean? That means you are able to take complex things and make them extremely simple, right? That's probably the highest form of academic knowledge. Academic knowledge. You say, hey, I know it. I could explain it to my 3-year-old, right? That's the highest form of, say, scholastic or academic knowledge. Knowing complex things and be able to explain it to a 3-year-old, right? Don't make it so complicated. Because really nothing is that complicated. It's only complicated it's limited to the language and expression, right? Which means oftentimes you can use a big word if it sums up an entire sentence, right? Like, wonderful. You've taken away a lot of words. Or you say, hey, I'm gonna write a 500-page essay filled with the, and, if, but. You know, like, what's the point of all that? You just did a ton of work, right? Efficiency is key, okay? Using words that maybe can sum up an entire thing is good, but then bad. You say, hey, I have a bias. I think people actually understand this big word. And 90% of people maybe don't. Right? They say, I'm not even interested in that. You're talking about something I'm not interested in. I can look it up. All right, so we got a little bit of good thinking and we got bad thinking. But we have what we call a bias. Ton of them. Ton of biases. Maybe I'll pull up the list of biases that are out there, but we'll talk about a few. Confirmation bias, right? Some obstacles. We have obstacles to our thinking. One of them is just tied into emotion. To say, hey, I think and I know, but I also feel what I know. Like, I feel like I'm right. Like, there's a feeling about your thinking. Like, yeah, my thinking's tied into my feelings. Like, oh, okay. Right? All right, so your thinking is conservative. Let's say politically thinking as a conservative. You say, well, if I have emotions tied to that as well too, I usually want to go seek out information that reaffirms my conservative thinking. Because maybe your thinking's tied in with your beliefs too, right? Which is partially emotional. Say I believe, right? What does that mean to believe? Right? It's a complex set of things, but part of it is emotional attachment to an idea. Right? So I have an emotional attachment to an idea. So with confirmation bias, we mean we have a likelihood or tendency to seek out information that we think confirms what we already know. So the conservative, you go to Fox News. But hey, check out what CNN said. They got some stats and graphs on where the latest information. Like, I don't want to see it. Why? Because it may not confirm what I believe. Right, but don't you want to know facts? I know we're talking about facts. And we say human beings don't necessarily want 100% facts. Partially, they like quick information and also information that feels good. There's an emotional tie to the thing, right? Emotional tie. So we have a ton of biases, right? Think of our prejudices, like how we sort of judge people. We prejudge. We prejudge why? Makes us feel a certain way, right? Now someone proves us wrong, we're like, oh, that's interesting. But we'll probably still keep going in the prejudice sense. All right, tendency to search for information that supports preconceptions and to ignore, distort, contradictory evidence. Let's say you have a belief system. Let's say you have a religious belief system. Think of this. You can't necessarily argue religious beliefs in an academic or scholastic scientific manner. But for the sake of argument, here, we'll say, hey, your belief system is what? And you would tell me, right? Great, this is fair, this is that. Man, great. I mean, man, how does that contrast in reference to other belief systems? In fact, I don't know, I never looked. You have no idea what other people believe. Other ideologies, other ideas, other practices, right? How would that be good knowledge to have? Wouldn't necessarily be. Right? You don't have anything to compare it to contrast it to. We say there's a lot of ignorance here, even in the beliefs, because if you don't even seek out to see what others have in terms of thoughts, ideologies, it means you're biased. Right? But I don't want to. Why? Because it'll make me feel some way. Maybe you're afraid there might be something out there that contradicts what you think. Right? So we'll seek out the same information that try to confirm what we already know or think we know to some degree. All right, fixation, inability to adopt to a fresh perspective. Usually learning really good learning, the best learning, the best thinking is adaptive. There's a famous line by John Maynard Keynes, who is one of the greatest economists ever, right? Keynesian economy, which creation of capitalism as we know, right? But he says, when circumstances change, I change my thinking or change my opinion, right? Because oftentimes he would say different things than he said in the past. He kind of contradicted himself. They're like, well, you're saying something new here. He's like, yeah, I am saying something new. This is a new time with new information, right? Adaptive learning. But if you have confirmation bias, you say, I don't want to learn anything new, right? I don't want the new information. You say, well, you're not going to adapt those neurons and have that plasticity to have some sort of adaptive learning to meet the current environment in which you are in. So fixation, your ability to adopt a fresh perspective. You are clinging on to that idea. And remember we say part of that is an emotional sort of predisposition. Right? You're fixated on the idea. Mental set, tendency to approach problems with a mindset of what has worked previously. Right? You can't approach each problem like you did in the past. New problems create new circumstances, new situations. Right? And you be open-minded. Open-mindedness is one of the greatest skills to have. There's the ability to not at least be biased to say that, hey, what worked in the past will ultimately work here now. Not necessarily true. All right, intuition. Forming good and bad decisions and judgments. Right? We place judgments and we make decisions. But usually we give weight to them. Right? Let's say on a 100% scale. How much weight are you giving to your decisions? Right? 30%, not too certain, 100%, 90%. How harsh do you judge people? Do you judge them at 100%, 50%? Right? How hard do you judge situations? A lot of this doesn't require a ton of effort, such as intuition. Effortless, immediate, right? Automatic feeling of thought is contrasted with explicit conscious reasoning. So we say once again, with things like intuition doesn't require any mental or psychic energy. It's automatic in some sense. People, the ancients would say that you have a gut brain, you have a heart brain, and you have a brain up here, right? Usually say there's a really emotional situation, there's a heart brain, right? Organ brain. But remember, in some sense, there may be a hint of truth to it. Maybe it's just kind of hard to express what that truth is, right? Because we say, hey, memory is stored in the organs. You have muscle memory, right? You repeat the same gait you walk in, right? You eat and chew the same. So if that's the case, maybe you do have some sort of thinking, thoughts, memories, processing organs of the stomach and the heart. Like I have a gut intuition. What do you mean? What's that expression you mean, gut? I can feel it in my gut about this thing. Oh, it's interesting. Why the gut? Why not your brain? Okay. So we say maybe that's intuition, but it's automatically there. It requires a little effort. All right, representativeness heuristic. Right? Estimating likelihood of events in terms of how well they seem to represent, match, or a particular prototype may lead us to more other relevant information. You say, hey, with the shortcuts, not accurate. Maybe they're really bad in some sense. Why? Because you already passed up the hot sauce and the ketchup and the mayo on the way because you were fixated on thinking it was in the ethnic aisle. Right? You passed up relevant information because that shortcut made you fixated and steered in one way, right? You didn't leave it open, right? You didn't leave your mind open to take in more information along the way. Why? Because you represented in your mind that it should be with these other groups of things that I think about. Availability heuristic. Right? When we say, hey, you know, it's good to have the information, you probably do know it, it's just not available to you right now. Right? And if it's not available, it's not good to you or anybody else. What's the point of it? Right? If instances come readily to mind, perhaps because of their vividness, we presume such events are common. Right? So if you think that things are very vivid to us, of high degree of importance, if it's high degree of importance to me, obviously it should be of importance to you in some way. Right? Because it's readily available to me and everyone else. But not necessarily true. When we say people have minds that are fleeting, once they think about something, they're going to give it only so much time before they move on. Right? You forgot what I talked about 5 minutes ago. It's not that important anymore. You move on to some new information. So you're like, well, this is fascinating for this human organism. It's constant, it's perpetual, it never stops. The mind is taking in information, but it's not really holding the information. Right? What is it holding? Along this train of thought of me talking for 50 minutes in class, you say, hey, there's a whole train of information. And I say, what did you get? You're like, I got 4 things. What are those 4 things that you talked about, Dr. Ross? Something that I already knew, something that was familiar, something that my mind linked up and associated with something else I was thinking about, or something else that I knew before, something that was new and stimulating. Like, okay, not everything was new and stimulating to you. Right? You say a lot of stuff wasn't. Like, yeah, okay, you mentioned a lot of stuff that was new, but it wasn't stimulating. It's not stimulating, who cares? And something else. So you said along that line of 50 minutes of being in class, in any class, your brain is not like an on-off switch. It's constantly on forever until you die or in a coma or something. Right? But we say, what are we actually retaining so that we reapply? You say, well, it's a perpetual thing. which means we should improve as we go along. We should constantly try to add. And how do you add? The best way is if you can apply what you learn in any class to all the other fields. That is genius. Genius is if you can apply psychology to engineering. If you apply engineering to sports, right? Because if not, you say, hey, once again, we're in these categories, we become fixated. No, the category is this, the box is this, right? It has 6 walls. Roof, floor, floor. You're like, well, that's limitation in mind. Right? You should say, I can apply any of this to any other field that I learned here at the school. You say, how? Think about it. It all applies. You're just not thinking about it anymore. Right? So we say in economics, we have behavior economics. Right? In politics is really not just politics. It's called political economy. What does that mean? Everything is done for money. Right? Political economy, not politics. Means everything is done in order for an economic benefit for the greater whole or for certain individuals. Right? Which means it can be applied. So you could think of, hey, if you learn psychology, you could be the greatest investor of all time. Why? Because all investing is due to human behavior. Whether they are frightened to invest or extremely confident to put their money somewhere. That's the base level of investing. That's it, right? So you can learn anything in any field, but the genius part is being applied to, and when people do, we usually say, man, that person's a genius. They thought about this and made it relevant to this, right? That's wonderful thinking. All right, let me get some